The formal meeting time was 5 o'clock, but I don't see, I know, Barry, you've got some extra, or you can take up plenty of time. And all we really need to do is kind of cover the bases with those whom we've lost and are missing today. And then whatever kind of updates we want. I've got an update to share with everybody from Tom Walker, who's outside of internet and cell phone coverage today.
Lucky him.
And so Chip and Al get a lot of credit for getting this thing going. I'll admit to being the mechanic if everything works. If everything doesn't work, it's the internet's fault.
Right.
But Chip, do you want to share any thoughts just to kind of?
Well, I was going to say something about David, but while we're waiting a little bit here, maybe before things started, has everybody had COVID?
Yeah,
I have not.
I have not.
No.
Yeah, well, there are not too many people in my circle left who haven't, and I just had it a couple of weeks ago. So it's despite being pretty damn careful about it.
Yeah.
Barry,
And avoid it.
But hopefully nobody's really been badly sick.
I took that Paxlovid and got a rebound case. So I got rid of it and got it.
Wow.
Yeah.
I had, it's been 5 years now, but I had esophageal cancer.
Oh, that's no
Took
fun.
out my esophagus, and the doctors that I knew well, a funny doctor story. We're having a meeting with the people that were going to handle my case, and the head nurse was speaking, telling us what was going to happen. And she said, and your surgeon will be Dr. Burfing. He's the head surgeon at the whole hospital. And I said, oh, that's great. Is that Billy Burfing? And she gave me the dirtiest look. She said, we call him Dr. Burfing. Do you know Dr. Burfing? I said, yeah, as a matter of fact, I did. I do. I coached his 2 kids in Little League hockey 35 years ago. And he was one of the good parents. That boy, did that shut her up. And then can you swear on this thing? I said, okay.
Yeah, definitely.
The day of my surgery, a breast cancer nurse who had been working with my wife for years, and they knew each other quite well. And she bumped into my second surgeon. I had 2 surgeons doing this thing. And she walked up to him in the hallway, and she's a tiny little 45-year-old woman, lovely person. She walked up, she took her finger breast and put it right in between his breastbones. And she said, do you have Mr. Treadwell on your schedule today? He said, yes, as a matter of fact, I do. She says, well, don't fuck it up. He's a good friend. Oh, well. And unfortunately now Debbie's back with cancer situation. So she has, I always get the word wrong, but what do we call it? Breast cancer. It's the offspring of breast cancer. What the hell's the name of it?
How's she doing?
Well, it's not curable, but it's treatable. So
That's good.
you hang in there, and she walks slowly, but her mind is fine, and we're living with it. But we sold our house in Florida because all our doctors are up here. And man, I just turned 80. You guys all,
Yeah.
Handling 2 houses and getting back and forth was just too much. And there's no question we would stay here in Pennsylvania. So I sold just before it started to go down again. But so that's
Tony Wilkins and I want to get you up to Maine to visit us.
well,
Your daughter's up there, right?
Yeah. And our 6th grandchild, her son, was president of his class at
Yarmouth?
no, further up.
Freeport?
Yeah,
Freeport.
Maine. He was
Yeah,
president of
Freeport.
the class in Freeport, Maine. Good kid, halfway decent athlete, but not college caliber probably. But he's very bright. He got in early admission to Harvard, and his mother sent us a picture, Judge Draper will get a kick out of this. He's out in front of his dorm entrance, and across the top it says Pennypacker, which was the house, the name of the house for the freshmen. Judge and I were in Pennypacker house on the 4th floor. My grandson's on the 2nd floor, 45 something years ago, 50 years, whatever it
That's
is.
amazing.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
Crack this up. Okay,
I hope it's been renovated, Barry.
I doubt it. My mother-in-law went to her 25th husband's 25th reunion years and years and years ago, and they stayed in the dorms. She wrote Nathan Pusey, the president, a nasty letter saying, "This is ridiculous. I never want to be exposed to a room like that in my life. Don't you have any paint there?" It's terrible, but I'm sure it's been painted since then. But
I see Al has joined us. Welcome, Al. Thank you very much for all of your preparation work on this shindig.
You're welcome.
We
You're
can't
welcome.
see your face. We can't see below your nose. Maybe you can tweak your camera just a little
Okay.
bit. They're beautiful.
There he is. Look
Okay.
at that. Hey, Teddy.
Hey,
How are you?
Yeah.
I just, believe me,
Just-
I
Al
I
Van
left
Dam,
the-
to
the
me,
18th hole about 10 minutes ago.
Well, we'll let you in if you shot par.
double
Well-
bogey, double bogey. How'd you finish?
The scramble.
Oh. There's no drinking alcohol on this program. What was that you just had?
Never you
Yeah.
mind, Barry.
Oh, okay, fine. None of my business.
It's an NA beer.
Oh, okay. Where's Judge?
He's just a blank page.
He's here, but he hid himself, I think.
I
I
wonder if he
don't,
can hear us.
He's having a bad hair day.
Yeah, could be.
Kenny, you look great.
Hello, Albert. How are you?
I,
Tony.
There's Al.
Haven't got
There he
rope.
is. Hi,
Hey,
Ted.
Tony.
where's Tony? Where's Tony?
Are you in Florida, Tony?
Yes. How are you? That looks like Florida.
I got hit a little bit. How'd your house make out?
We dodged a bullet. There was
Yeah.
nary a scratch.
That's good.
So
Good
I know.
job.
Hey, Chris,
Hey, Tony,
how are you?
I'm good.
Good. You didn't get anything.
I moved from Longboat Key to, 20 miles east. Longboat didn't barely lose a leaf. And I had 5 trees uprooted and a window blown out. And anyway, but
You
fortunately,
Did you get Zoom, the scry tide surge rather?
no, I got, it's interesting. I've got for the first time FEMA working to see if they can correct some of the things that got blown away. But yeah, it was quite an evening. I put a generator and 1,000-gallon propane tank in, and it quit after 4 hours. And I got the cans out, and that was it.
Well, we lost power for a few days. I figured, well, maybe I'll see about getting a generator. $31,000.
Oh, well, that's, yeah. My brother lives in Michigan, and he bought something to that effect, and he's actually he choked on the spending, but on the comfort when the power goes out, he's real happy he got it.
Yeah, we've got one in Maine, which cost, 10% of that almost, was but $10,000. So they're jacking things up. The Ferrari dealer sold 40 cars because what happened with the storm surge, we have these high rises with the garages underneath them.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where all the water went when it came in, and it just, wiped out the cars and golf carts. So.
Wow.
I just had Mr. Draper pop onto my screen.
Indeed.
Wow. Nice to
Very
meet
Hi,
good.
you.
George.
There he is.
It is. How about
Hey,
that?
it is. Yes. I can only see a few of you because my PC wasn't working, so I'm using my iPad. But
I can see Dan, I can see Teddy, Barry,
Yeah, okay.
Ah, there we go. It's another face.
Who was that? Who was that?
Dan, Daniel, Dr. Dan.
Oh, Dr. Dan. Okay, I got him.
There's Al.
There you go. It looks like we got 14. 14. Go ahead. It looks like we got 14 people, which is about the number who participated. Actually, we got 16 people participating in the survey that we did. So thanks everybody for participating. And Al or Chip, do either of you have a preference as to the sequence that we tribute those of us who have?
Whatever you want, Lenny.
That makes no difference to me, but maybe start with David Agney at we'll go top of the alphabet, bottom of the alphabet.
On mute.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah,
And-
absolutely. I'd love to say a few words about David. I mean, David was really a pioneer at Nobles, and in the way none of us was. I mean, he'd been at Perkins, the famous school for the blind, which he hated with a passion, actually. But it was really unusual in those days for blind kids to be mainstreamed in a regular school like Nobles. So there wasn't all that much precedent that he had to go by. But he was incredibly successful. I mean, he seemed to have been able to do anything that he was required to do. I mean, we all remember his playing. He was a big cheerleader at the football games, as I remember. And he was such a successful guy and a buoyant spirit. That I think he really gave something to all of us. And what we probably didn't do so much, I know I didn't, is appreciate the difficulties that he was facing and the enormous amount of effort that he had to put in just to, be a regular student at Nobles. But, we were really lucky to see him in action because he, as I say, he was a pioneer of the blind, and we got to see it. I'm going to tell one anecdote about David. Really, one of the most peculiar things I did while I was at Nobles, it was David got invited to a spring weekend at Northfield School, which is this really old-fashioned place in far distant Massachusetts, and I went along as a driver. He was invited by Mr. Wise's daughter, whose name I can't remember, but
Penny.
Yeah, Penny, that's right. And so, we drove out there to the Northfield School for a spring weekend. Northfield School then, well, I always said that the Nobles was still kind of in the 19th century, but Northfield School was in the 18th century. I mean, it was totally amazingly formal and, really had a nasty feel to it. But we got there and, we were greeted by our dates in the formal living room with, horsehair furniture. And, it really was a weird experience. And I think it would have been a terrible experience, except for the fact that David was always up for an adventure. So he was having a great time just experiencing, another part of the world. And because he had a great time, I had a good time too. So anyway, I feel I really benefited, both in lots of ways from his presence in our class, and his particular personality, really added a lot to my experience, and I hope to some other people's. That's it.
Well, that's terrific.
I have a little story about him. He took Latin, of course, and underneath, I can't remember what it was, but underneath the big auditorium was a room, unfinished down there. And I don't know who took Latin in that class, but he was one of them. And I was there, and we go down under, we're trying to figure out what words are, and he would do it in Braille much faster than we could think of anything. So he got us through Mr. Horton's Latin, which also led to my ability to get a diploma from Harvard University, because Harvard at that time said if you had such and such a score in the aptitude tests on various subjects, one of which was Latin, you didn't have to take a foreign language. So I never took a language, and it was all due to having a tutorial in the basement of the auditorium.
Well, he helped me down there too every morning.
Were you there with me, Wilkins?
Yeah, and I thought I had it down pretty cold until I go into Square's room and then he'd call on me and just roast the crap out of me. And we'd go in a complete circle till I come back to what I'd started with and go, oh, geez, and then go on to Deinell or somebody. So I appreciated his trying to help.
Just a word about another side of David, if I may. Although before I say that, I do want to say to Chip that my son graduated from Northfield Mount Herman and survived it and loved it, but never mind.
Oh, yeah. When it's combined with Mount Herman now, right? Yeah. It's a completely different place.
Anyway, at our 10th reunion, I drove up into the school, and Lenny Holmes was right out there in the parking lot, and he brought me into the old place where we all gathered every morning with the teachers and Mr. Putnam. And at the end of that evening, I was staying with my mother. I was back from Greece, and I was staying with my mother in Boston. I offered to drive David back home to Boston to his apartment in Com Ave. And so I drove him back there, and that began a friendship, very close friendship. It lasted for some years. And David, during that time, was often having to have electric shock therapy.
Is being recorded.
Somebody just joined.
Yeah.
Kurt.
Anyway, he was having electroshock therapy from time to time. And at that time, I was editing a memoir that he was writing about his years in America. Anyway, just to let this go, he at one point after his electroshock therapies, forgot that he had written this memoir. Point after his forgot that he had written this. Getting a lot of interference here. I don't know if that's me.
Allow me to interrupt. I suggest everybody mute themselves. And then if you're speaking, just unmute somewhere along. Maybe go to the speakers back into.
Kurt, muted.
There we go. Who was that?
Kurt.
Okay, go ahead. Now it's kind of hairy sometimes because we don't remember to unmute ourselves. So just be on the attentive side. When you want to speak, just unmute yourself before you speak and then mute when you get off. Okay, go ahead. Continue, Judge.
I basically finished. Our friendship lasted for many years. And when he went into the institution in Roslindale, it's sort of cool because I don't know how to unmute. How do I unmute?
Not you.
I'll stop.
It says the noise is coming from yours.
Okay. Oh, Kirk is who went? Okay, someone went off.
Kurt.
Kirk's still here.
Oh,
There he is. Yeah.
Well, it sounds pretty good now on this side.
Perfect.
Okay, anyone want to pick it up?
Yeah, can I throw a little Dave Agney story? Excuse me. Dave and I became very close, being fellow Purple Knights. And I was a weekend drummer, and Dave was a full-time piano player of some note. I think you all would agree. We were, Johnny Wood was our fifth member. He was our electric guitarist. And along with Tom Jansen and Jim Henry from the class of '61. But anyway, Johnny Wood got us a gig playing at the Bass River Yacht Club and on the Cape, and that's where his family home for generations, second home had been. So we all jumped in my parents' 1956 Pontiac station wagon, loaded the drums and the equipment and back, and David and I and Jim Henry got in the car and headed south to the Cape. We got down there, we had a good night, Saturday night, playing at this dance they had at the Bass River Yacht Club, and we had a lot of fun. The next day we got up a little hungover, and which we were too young to be, but we were, not David, of course. But the story ends on the trip home, which was coming up wonderful 3-lane Route 3 on a Sunday afternoon from the Cape back into reality heading towards Boston. And the traffic was just packed bumper to bumper. And of course, this is the height of the summer season. And I was driving and not paying much attention, I guess. And I sort of eased up on the brake and I coasted forward and rammed into the guy in front of me.
Oh, God.
Well, David, of course, didn't know what was going on. And he said, "What happened? What happened?" And he started panicking. And I said, "David, don't worry." I said, "It's just a little bumper tap. I hit the guy in front of me." And he said, "Call the cops, call the cops." I just always remembered that. It cracked me up. But we chatted with the guy in the car in front of us, and he wasn't very pleasant, but we did exchange information and everything worked out fine. And David, poor guy, calmed down, and we laughed about it the rest of the way to Boston. But I've always remembered that little trip, and David looking all around, which is kind of a strange statement to make, but his head was swinging from side to side as though he were looking all around. And he wanted to know what happened. And we didn't have to call the cops. So anyway, I enjoyed Dave. He was a very good friend of mine, and we had a special relationship, I think, through the music and the band. And I was sorry to hear of his passing.
I don't want to shortchange any commentary anywhere, but we do need to cover at least 6 or 5 more classmates. So let's come back to David if we get through the others, and that goes for everybody as well. Next one on the list is John Auerbach. Mike, you want to?
Everybody hear me? I'm good.
Yeah.
As you remember, John looked old when he was young, and he looked younger kind of when he got older. Not much gray hair there, not much hair. Last time I was with John was September 2012, and we were in Tribeca with my wife Lowell and Annie, his wonderful wife, and John, and he was the mayor of his little area of Tribeca. Everybody that went by, he knew most of the people. He looked great. He was so excited. He was talking about a vintage car race that he was going to do from Peking, China to Paris with his son. And it was 8,500 miles, and he couldn't talk, and just talked on and on about it. Unfortunately, he never got to do the race. 10 weeks later, he passed away, and he never knew he had it, but he had a very aggressive lung cancer at the time. Happier memories. I remember some of the capers we were involved with at Nobles. He was probably the instigator, not me. But one snowy morning at 4 a.m., we got up and rolled the largest snowball we could possibly push up against the schoolhouse, hoping that we would delay the opening of the school. I doubt we did. One night, we got the dumb idea to grab our pillows and sleeping bag, and we slept above the schoolhouse up in the attic there. And another episode with John and I, which wasn't quite so smart. He did look old, and we were in Concord. He bought a 6-pack of beer, and we started up the long driveway to Concord Country Club to a dance. We got halfway up. Of course, the police were there. They grabbed us, took us to the police station, kept us there for several hours. Luckily, they didn't call our parents, just kicked us on the butt and got us out of there. And there are many, many, many more stories that John and I had at Nobles. He was always up for doing something. Who was John? We only knew him for a fraction of his life. And in his own words, he was the world's worst employee. And when I grow up, he just pursued his passions in everything he did. His job was kind of complicated to understand. I YouTubed on Bloomberg on television, and he had a relationship with brokerage companies in 129 countries, a lot of them in Africa, and he executed trades through these brokerage companies. And he was quite unique and a pioneer in that area. He raced vintage cars all around the world. He produced films. One was selected for the New York Film Festival, and he took acting lessons. I don't know if he ever was in any of his films, and was a great father, a daughter and 3 sons, and he gave back. He pursued a lot of environmental causes, and he has a scholarship at Nobles for students that want to go to Nobles from Africa. As we all know, he was a unique soul, very happy, optimistic, adventuresome. He never took himself seriously, and he certainly marched to his own drummer. And I know he'd be proud of his legacy. His sons are also following their passions in work and in play. Jake, the oldest, sells vintage cars. Nikki, his middle one, is in the fashion world, and Sasha, the younger one, works in the NBA. As you probably all know, John was the brother I really never had, and I miss you, John, and love you. Thank you.
Perfect, Mike.
Great.
Well done.
You had a lot of nice sisters, though.
Yeah.
Tried to fix me up once. I don't know how I blew that one.
My sister, that's how I met my wife, through my sisters. So good to have a lot of sisters.
Yeah.
Mike,
You had a wonderful mom and dad as well. Anybody else got a quick comment on John?
I remember an odd fact about John is that at one point he was peddling around the school a long playing record called Folk Singers Round Harvard Square. And it had Bob Dylan and various other people who later became famous. And I always regretted that I never bought one.
I did. Joan Baez was one
Yeah,
of the,
Joan Baez. Yep.
Yeah.
one of the cuts on it, and I remember that got me very interested in following her at the Mount Auburn Club in Cambridge, and it took me and a few others down to the Newport Folk Festival in 58 and 59, I believe, and had some enjoyable times down there. I think Mr. Gibson was around at some of those visits.
That's correct.
Anyway, enjoyable.
I was with you, Gar, when they had the riot year. We got locked into Free Buddy Park.
That's right.
And other than that, the memory I have of that year was that we were wandering around between shows or before the show, and Pete Seeger was sitting in one of the parks with a circle of about 20 guitar players, just singing with everybody.
Yeah.
Well, super. Next on the list is Woody Barr. And I forget who, I didn't make a note, who volunteered to do Woody. Was that you, Gar, or?
I believe it was.
I'd like Kirk Gibson to.
Kirk, okay, Kirk, thanks.
All right, can you hear me?
Kirk,
Yep.
Kirk, tell him about our reaction to Woody's memorial service.
Which one? Let me go back a little bit. Woody, I met Woody on my first day at Nobles in whatever it was, 4th class. And we hit it off okay. The next day he came to class, very excited. He says, guess what? I said, what? Your mother was my stepfather's first date. how the hell did that happen? But, my mother was from Providence, and I guess he was. And so that gave us something in common. We became friends. You'll probably remember that back then, we all played sports. I knew nothing. I had never, ever in my life touched a football. We didn't have that down in Rhode Island where I lived. And I remember being a Mohawk or an Oneida or something, being just totally buffaloed by the whole damn thing. And Woody says, why don't you come over and play soccer? I said, what's soccer? He said, well, it's a lot easier than football. So I went and played soccer. Not very well, as I recall, but at least I wouldn't get my head brained in by something I didn't understand at all. But over the years, we stayed in touch. And the next major touch was in the Army. We kind of overlapped a little bit in the Army. I went quite early, my first semester at Penn. I just wasn't ready for it. And I'll be boasting and saying it was too easy after Nobles, and it really was, so I didn't spend any time studying. But I realized that a country boy in a big city like Philadelphia just wasn't a good match. So I joined the Army to go grow up, and it was the best thing I ever did in my life. It saved my life. But Woody left Dartmouth at one point or another, and we overlapped in Germany, which was great. I actually had a couple of beers. Later on, in 1966, I went back to Germany to be in a friend of mine's wedding, and I was there in Europe for the summer because I only had a round trip on a charter plane that went back in September. So I went down to Stuttgart, saw some old friends of mine, bought an old motorcycle from the police department and drove it down. I was going to Switzerland to work, and I stopped in Munich, and I saw Woody there at the house of Fräulein Bloch, which is, of course, his wife, became his wife, Ingrid, who's still a good friend. And then we separated. We kept in contact, happy birthday and stuff like that, but not much touch. And then it happened that just a few years ago, we bought a place up in Canada that needed to be rebuilt. And so it made I went back and forth from Pennsylvania to New Brunswick. And guess who lived about halfway there? It was Woody. And I stopped and visited and stayed with them several times. And it was just great getting together again. And I would consider him one of my lifelong friends. And the day I learned that he died, it just hit me in the chest like a big sledgehammer. I just couldn't believe it. Unfortunately, as we age, it happens more often than not to people we know and hold dear. But I've always said it's hard to make a good friend, but it's even harder to lose one. And Woody certainly fit into that category. So Woody is one of the few people I ever know that actually had two funerals. And I attended both of them. Now, what is the episode, is it Judge, that you wanted to bring up?
Well, just when we went to the one that I was with you at, we felt that the fellow who ran it, who was a former minister and guitar player, was sort of smarmy. He missed Woody's sense of humor. He missed the cynical wit of the man. And we were walking, you and I, back to the reception, and we said, "Yeah, they just missed it. They missed it."
Yeah, it was too bad.
Yeah.
But that's the first time I'd seen Jidge in many years. I looked around and said, "Jidge?" He said, "Kirk." So we meet in strange places and strange ways. And then I had the occasion to go visit Jidge at his place there in Maine. Just absolutely beautiful. I recommend it. And anyway, Woody was a good friend, and I miss him. And I still talk to Ingrid, and we laugh about a few things. One of the funny things was when I visited, she said, "You got to look at this." I said, "What?" She goes rummaging around, and she pulls out a picture of me in 1966 on my old German motorcycle when I went to visit him. It's so fun. So, as I say, good friends are great to have had, and we're lucky to have them.
I'd just like to add one story about Woody that took place at Nobles. There was one day when he had a terrible head cold, and he was using a lot of handkerchiefs, and he went into the bathroom to rinse them out, put them on the radiator, and an upperclassman came in and began pushing him around. Mike Poor walks into the room, grabs the upperclassman by the lapels, and tosses him into the toilet stall. And later, when Woody was writing an article or a paper for his work in a graduate school at Harvard, he wrote about that story, and I think he told you, Mike, didn't he, that he had written about that.
Yeah.
So,
go ahead, Tony.
No, I have nothing.
Oh, I'm just gonna say real quick, I'll try to be quick. Woody and I crossed paths sometime after Nobles in quite a few different ways, but one of the most fun one was my son came home for a Sunday dinner or something, and he was a young man at the time, probably, I don't know, 18, 19. And he said, I've got this new friend who's down in Portsmouth. He's a real sharp guy. I like him a lot. And I may bring him up next weekend. And I said, what's his name? He said, Al Barr. And I
Oh,
said,
yeah.
Al Barr. I said, it's funny, I went to school with a guy named Woody Barr. And my son Gar turned to me and his jaw dropped and he said, that's his father's name. And sure enough, my son had tripped over Al, who is the lead singer for the whatever.
Dropkick Murphys. Dropkick Murphy.
Dropkick Murphy.
Yeah, Dropkick Murphys band. And when Woody passed away, one of the first people that Al called was myself. Because sadly, my son passed away at age 29. And Al was one of the first guys at the funeral with Woody. And so a tender moment for me all the way around.
Wow.
Okay, anyone else on Woody? If not,
Can
Go
I
ahead.
jump in just for a quick second? When I came home for Christmas break, I spotted Woody walking up Village Avenue, trudging along, headed home, and he had just left Dartmouth. And I've never seen a sadder look on anyone's face. He said, I'm just going to go in the Army and deal with life after that. The other thing as a link from Woody is I've been very close to Roger Burley over the years, see him at least every 5th year at reunions, but we spent time with him this summer out on Cliff Island. And he called me last winter when Woody died, and he said, I'm very nervous. I said, why is that? He said, well, Auerbach's gone, Agney's gone, Barr's gone, and guess who's next alphabetically?
Alphabetically.
And he'll be very glad that we all know he's not on the Zoom because he's traveling, which he does frequently. He just got back from a month in Scotland, but he's also traveling somewhere this weekend. And he will be very sad he missed it. He missed the 50th because he mistakenly booked his lady friend's daughter's wedding on our 50th. So he didn't make that, but he's functioning in a very high level along the Maine coast, and he welcomes everybody I know.
well, super, thank you.
I remember Roger had a business card that he sent me once or gave me once, and it said finest kind excavation, no job too small.
Right,
I thought that was funny.
I got one of those too, yeah.
Yeah, his card also said finest kind EPD, which was environmental protective devices, because the island that he was actually living full-time on at that point was required to put in sewage treatment. And since he had the only backhoe on the island, he did very well financially putting in all of the sewage treatment. But environment protective devices was not the way he called it. He said, his finest kind, eat pussy daily.
Too much. Okay, next on the list is George Blanchard. And I think Ted Burt volunteered to do.
No, it's Dudley Post.
Oh, Dudley, that's right. Sorry. I'll get it right here. I can't even read my own notes.
No, I talked to him this morning and he said he'd be on.
He's here.
He's
Oh,
on.
good, good.
I'm here. Yeah, well, I can split the honors with Dan because they were in college together. But George, maybe I knew, he was really, the class probably knows him as a theater guy because he was in plays, and that was his interest, which he pursued later in life. But I knew him because we were the only two seniors on the tennis team. And George played tennis because he had a court on his house in Dedham. He never seemed to take it too seriously. In fact, he didn't take anything terribly seriously, I could tell. He was pretty casual and colorful, and it would be unfair to use the word, I don't know, flaky. He was colorful. He was in theater. And one anecdote I remember clearly, I wonder if anyone else does, but we all gave senior speeches back in those days. They've abolished that, of course. George went up to the podium, which is about a foot, raised about a foot above floor level, and he tripped and he wiped out. And there was no sign of George for a long, like about 15 seconds, which is a long time. I was very embarrassed and uncomfortable. And he stood up and gave a speech, and perfectly normal. I asked him about it later, and he said his whole life he always wanted to trip on the way up. It was a practice pratfall, not an accident. But I really got to know George because we drove out to West together in 1959, the northern route, which I have not done since, through Montana, South Dakota. Terrific trip. The name of the game was for the guy on the passenger side to throw bottles out the window and hit a sign. And speed limits in Montana were 80 miles an hour. I think we had one hit the whole trip, but it was fun trying. So George left a memorable mark on me, and it's not what you're thinking, because we pulled the car over once. I think it was in Montana. We both got out of the car. I was driving. George lights a firecracker, throws it over the car. It goes off right next to my face. I jerk my head over, hit it on the corner of the door. And I checked this morning, and if you look really closely, you can still see the echoes of a scar from 60 years ago. So I still remember George from that one. Firecracker, he never played with firecrackers until that day. I left him off in Spokane. He had a job at a pea canning factory. And then I went on to a cattle ranch in Colorado. And I sadly did lose touch with him. You know, he was baking bread in New Mexico. And it was really sad to see him at the 50th. He really didn't recognize me. I wanted to tell stories about our trip, and he just wasn't there, as you know. Really sad. So I'm sure Dan's here. Dan, you can fill in the rest.
Let me just unmute this thing. Yeah, I was very close with George, both while I was at Nobles, but also thereafter. And I kept in touch with him, including with his wife, Ann Trott, whom she and I emailed back and forth. And George was quite the character, both while he was at Nobles, and he and I were roommates the first couple of years when we were at Princeton. George was very rebellious, as many of you know. He came from a very famous Back Bay Boston family, and he wanted to get the hell out of there as fast as possible. And so he went to Princeton, which in and of itself was the ultimate form of rebellion. And he also came from a family where he was probably the only one of 4 children who could have gotten into Harvard. And he walked away from that to basically tell his father to fuck himself. It's very clear, and he was very aware of it, and we talked about it. But George went to Princeton, and we roomed together the summer before, when we graduated from Nobles in 1960. We also did the around the world trip with Tommy Walker. Tommy Walker got us a VW van from his uncle in Minneapolis, and we drove this brand new VW microbus all the way from Brookline to across the United States. We visited some of his relatives and other people's relatives, and went to San Francisco on the 4th of July, and down to the Big Sur. And, he just had a wonderful time. And then we drove up the Pacific coast. We went to Alaska on the Alcan Highway back in the days when it wasn't paved. And the bus got totally pockmarked. It got filled with all these stone dents. And at one point, there was this mosquito in the bus, and George wound up and slapped the mosquito, and the windshield went out of the bus. So anyway, we got up there and we dropped George off in Washington State, and he had a summer job working with the Conservation Corps. And he worked there for the summer, and then Tommy and I drove this somewhat dilapidated but brand new bus all the way back across the northern part of the United States and the southern part of Canada, back to Archie Walker Volkswagen in Minneapolis, where we lived in this lavish house that belonged to Tommy's grandfather on Lake Minnetonka, while Archie Walker Volkswagen totally rebuilt this bus. It came back, it looked brand new. They must have replaced every window, every metal panel, and totally rebuilt the engine and all the rest of this stuff. And we drove it back, and the only problem was Archie Walker Volkswagen failed to attach the air cleaner to the top of the engine. And so we had to drive back at about 20 miles per hour. And Tommy and I were such idiots, we didn't know how to fix the thing. But we ultimately got back to Boston. George spent the summer there, and then I met him in Princeton as a freshman, and we were together there. And George was very interested in the theater. He became the president of Theater On Team, which is a very well-known old theater, goes back 100 years. And George was there and actually got more interested in lighting than in acting. At Princeton, in order to get your diploma, you have to do an original thesis, just like at Nobles. Remember, we had to write a senior thesis, some kind of big papers of junior year, senior year. I can't remember what it was. I remember mine was on Pasteur, but I don't remember what George's was. So George was
I don't remember I wrote one.
Yeah, George was a philosophy major, and he did everything you have to do to graduate from Princeton, except he never turned in his thesis. And Princeton has a rule. You can turn in your thesis 20, 30 years later and still graduate. They will give you your diploma, 20 years later. George could never do that. And I think that was a message to his father, that not only was he the only son who could go to Harvard, who was not going to Harvard, he also was the one who went to the Ivy League, although his brother went to Cornell, that he wasn't going to graduate. So 3 9/10 years through Princeton, George never got a college diploma. So he went off to New York, and he worked off Broadway for a number of years. And just to ultimate revenge with the family, his first wife was a black soul singer. You can imagine how that went over at the John Adams Blanchard family. If they hadn't disowned him by then, they sure did. Well, the marriage didn't work out after a few years, and George left and went to the Pacific Northwest and again worked in Washington State. And I sort of lost track of him there for a few years, but he ultimately used his electrician skills that he had learned at On Team and subsequently off theater in New York to start an electrical business. And his electrical contractor business was in New Mexico, of all places, Las Vegas, New Mexico. There is such a town. I visited, it's very small. And there he met and married Anne, who was his wife for the last 25, 30 years of his life. And she's a potter. She does very good original pottery, and you can look her up. And I have gone there and visited them, and I still keep in touch with her. And George did a lot of good works in this area. He was very involved in local theater there and helped to develop a local theater. He volunteered there. He did all the lighting for lots of shows and seemed to have a very happy life there. Unfortunately, George, the last 10, 15 years became demented. And when you saw him at the 50th reunion, he was really kind of gone. And I saw him a year or so before he died. He never had any children, although Ann's family, he had lots of nieces and nephews whom he was very close with. And George was just a free spirit who just did his own thing. A lot of it was rebellion against his family of origin. He was fully aware of that, but it didn't change his behavior. He never turned in his Princeton thesis. He never graduated from college. But he had a wonderful life in terms of the way in which he interacted and related with other people. And I miss George to this day, but I do keep in touch with Ann.
Well, that's a pretty good report from the two of you and others. Thank you. I didn't know George that well, but that's a good story. So let's move on to Mike Deinell.
Yes, Mike Deinell. I don't have a great saga like this. We never crossed the country or whatever, but I did hear him give a service at St. Paul's in Dedham when he was in full regalia. And I want to tell you, he was one impressive minister, if you will. He was at the robes and the big presence. Anyway, so he was wonderful. But I remember one story that I remember from the time of Nobles was I was in my driveway and up pulls Mike Deinell in a Vespa. And it was a brand new Vespa and I had never seen one before. Fell in love with it, not him, with it. And I have been envious all my life about that Vespa. And I don't remember seeing it an awful lot after that. Maybe he trashed it or something. And when I was thinking of that, I was thinking about the same sort of a topic. One of you guys, and I know who I think it is, but I don't think you're on the screen. But one of you guys had the first Volkswagen Beetle. Who was it?
John Wood.
John Wood.
John Wood.
Johnny Wood, exactly. You got it. That's the first one of those that I saw. But Mike was a force in himself. One of the guys who's written some books. How many of us have written books? George has.
I have a great Michael Deinell story. We were freshmen at Harvard, and we went out for football, and we didn't get higher than the B team. There was an A team and a B team, and Mike was a guard on the B team, and I'm a halfback sharing duties with a guy named Scott Harshbarger. You'll all know Harshbarger from his political things. And he was from State College, Pennsylvania, didn't want to come to Harvard, wanted to go to Penn State, but his father made him come to Harvard. So we're on the scrub field for the second B freshman team, and Mike's the pulling guard. And we had a small guy who was a coach, a great guy. I think his name was Law. It's funny how those names can come into your brain. But we were running this trap play where Mike had to pull the guard and come across and knock out the opponent. And on playing defense was a guy named Ernie Zizis, who turned out to be quite a football player, but he was a transfer freshman. So he was out there with us, and he was one tough son of a gun. And so I ran it I think Harshbarger ran it the first time, and bam, Zizis comes right by Deinell and smothers Harshbarger all over the place. And we come back into the huddle, and Mike says to the coach, "Run that play again, coach. I'll get him this time." So Harshbarger looked at me. He says, "It's your turn." So I ran. I got blitzed, and he come back to the huddle, and Mike says, "God damn it, coach, run that one more time." And Harshbarger says, "Well, I'm not running it. I'm not running it. I got smothered twice." So that was my Mike Deinell clip. None of us, by the way, made the varsity except Harshbarger, who turned out to be an all Ivy League halfback and a great friend of mine, even though we have our political differences. But I'm not going there. Okay.
Hey, Chip Gray made the varsity, played 4 years.
John Gray,
Chip Gray.
but he wasn't on the B. He wasn't on the B team that I was on.
All right.
Do you remember that, John? you remember Harshbarger in our freshman years, John?
Unmute.
Okay, maybe he didn't pick that up. No big deal.
No, Chip's on mute.
Pardon?
I think Chip is on mute.
He is.
At least
Oh,
I
okay.
I'm unmuted. That's the problem. Scott was a great guy on a lot of personal and for me, political levels as well. But he was a wonderful guy to know and to play with.
His father, go ahead.
I had a limited football career, but the longest pass I ever caught was a halfback pass that he threw.
Okay.
And he gained about 30 yards, but after he threw the pass, he committed some sort of foul, and the whole play was called back. After the game, he knew this was kind of a bigger deal for me than it was for him. He came over and apologized for fouling up the play. Just a wonderful gentleman in every respect.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Chip, I remember you playing at the Brown game, so you were, I forget if you were a
played-
starter or something, but you were playing.
I played. There's, I probably played 100 minutes in junior and senior year, but I was never the starting end. Harvard had a lot of wonderful ends in those days, and I was kind of a walk-on. There were the Ivy League claims they don't have athletic scholarships, but they really do. And I kind of just got on by chance. So, but I had a good time doing it. It was fun.
Well, thanks for all of that. And I think the last one on our list is the Jake Lincoln.
I'll just further think about Mike Deinell. Mike Deinell roomed with Tommy Walker, who was a close friend of mine when Tommy was at Harvard College. And Mike then went on to marry Cammie Mitten, whom some of you may know.
Oh, yeah.
Partied with her, and they had 2 children together. And then Mike died, and she's in Florida and is remarried. No, she's deceased now. Excuse me, she's also deceased. But she went on, moved to Florida after his death, remarried, did not have additional children, but she has stepchildren.
Anybody else? Oh, Mike?
Yep. I'll just jump in quickly. 2 things. One is that Vespa that you referred to was actually what the 2 of us used to ride to work for a summer job that we had with Norfolk County Mosquito Control. And the second thing is when he was in theological school and he was doing counseling, he always would record the sessions with the couples he was counseling, and they would bring it back the next week. And he said they'd always say, "Now, what should we do? Do you listen to it?" And he said, "Yes, I do." But he said, "I just erase them and use them again."
When I was thinking of Michael, I came up with a strange idea, but it's sort of unique in my experience. But anyway, he's a person who looks very much like his mother. I don't know if any of you knew his mother, but I always thought he looked a lot like his mother. For whatever that's worth.
Okay. Last call.
Jake?
And we're going to Jake. Here, Barry?
I played varsity football, hockey, and baseball with Jake. He was a great friend, and you'd think I'd have all kinds of stories to tell, but those aren't the stories I want to tell. Just briefly, my wife, Debbie, and Jake both summited in East Falmouth at a little community called Manat on the Cape. And the first time I ever met Debbie was when I went down to visit Jake at the Cape. So that started my relationship with Jake. The second thing that happened to us was I remember the name Jack Dewey. He did remedial reading for those of us that couldn't read very quickly. And Jake and I were designated to go to Jack Dewey's summer seminar to speed up our reading program. And Jake had a car which he called the Chuggy. It was an old Model T Ford or something. And we would go.
Play.
And we would go to Jack Dewey's class, and then we'd stop on the way home for a hamburger or something. And we're driving back towards my house in Dover, and Jake decides to turn around and go the other way. Well, as we turned around, somebody came around the corner and nailed us. And Jake was beside himself with that. Then my final story with Jake was when he went to, I gotta think, Ripon is where he went to college, freshman year, and we were at Harvard, and Jake came home for a Christmas party, and they threw a party at his house in Framingham, and Jake was there with my wife to be, Debbie, and a couple of other people, and Jake pulled me aside and he says, Barry, he said, I want you to do me a favor. I said, what's that? He says, well, you've met Debbie. She's a very close friend of mine. I really love her, but I can't stop her. She's a senior in high school in Waltham, Massachusetts, and she's dating guys. He said, I would like you to call her up and date and take her out on a date. And I said, Jake, that doesn't sound like a good idea to me. No, I really would like you to do that just as a friend. I said, well, okay. So I remember my parents, after I took my laundry out to Dover, going back to Harvard, I said, let's go over through Waltham. I want to try to figure out where this gal, Debbie Carr, lives. And that started my pursuit of Debbie. And I finally met her at I don't remember that exact occasion, but I said, as I said to Jake, I don't think this is a very good idea. And I think Jake is, if he was alive today, it was the worst decision of my life, because I dated Debbie every weekend from then on. And poor Jake, he had a heart failure he was in the Harvard, there was some study that they did.
Birmingham.
His father had the same
The
problem.
Birmingham study, yeah.
Yeah, whatever it was, but yeah, he lived a full life. Boy, he loved the ladies, and he was a great pal and of mine.
You talk about Northfield. I have a dance card from the senior prom at Nobles with the names of some of the fellas and their dates, and one of them is Debbie Carr.
Yeah, was really.
I remember. Yeah.
Well, she's in the other room. She's hanging in there. She has a return of some cancer. She's had 5 different cancer situations, all of which she survived. And now she has what's called metastatic, if I say that right, breast cancer, which is it gets into the bones. And they told us, this was a year ago, that it is curable, but not, it is treatable, but not curable. So she's going through that now with shots and stuff. And she's fighting and hanging in there pretty good, but it's rough. I think it's 5 separate, unrelated cancer issues. So,
wow.
But she's doing fine, as best you can expect. So.
Oh,
okay.
May I add just one more quick Jake Lincoln story?
Sure.
Barry might even remember where this took place. I'm not sure. It's a baseball story, and we were playing baseball senior year. I think we may have been at Groton Barry with Parky Kais, and Treadwell and Draper and Lincoln did a classic double play, the first we'd ever done. Barry to me and me to Jake, and it was the first time we'd ever turned that sort of classic double play. And I walked up to Jake afterwards. We were throwing the ball around, and Jake said, "About fucking time."
Let me jump in and just say, I remember Barry and Debbie hosting a 10th reunion in Sherburne, probably.
That's right. That's right.
It was the last time I had any contact with Jake, because of course, toward the end of the party, we had to call Jake, and that was really good. And unfortunately, the next day was the Bobby Orr fly through the air goal, and I was in such bad shape, I missed the first 2 periods. I saw the best part, but thank you for the party.
I was
Debbie,
at that game.
yeah, Debbie and I were there. I think it was May 10th. Yeah,
Yeah.
I always ask the question, who was the player that tripped him? And the St. Louis Blues had 3 brothers. They were called their name was the Player brothers. And everybody guesses that. It wasn't. It was a guy named, why I remember these things, Judge, I emailed today. Why you remember these things, but his name was Noel Picard, who pulled the legs out from under Bobby Orr as he flew through the air and scored the winning goal. So Jake was a good guy. He was a fighter and a lover.
He really loved that Model A of his. And
Yeah.
I remember it very well because I was driving from Weston. I guess he was driving from Framingham, and I passed him on 128 every day. And he was going about 40 miles an hour, and he loved it.
Yeah, he was hell on wheels. I think I talked to the guys earlier, but I want to share one general situation in my life, and that is our 6th, my daughter's son is our 6th grandchild. And none of them were even, I'm not sure any of them. I think my daughter, my daughter applied and got into Harvard. And Jeffrey, my 2nd son, got in. My oldest son did not. But now along comes the 2nd generation, and there weren't any kids that really looked like they had a chance. I think a couple tried. Then along comes my 6th grandchild from Maine, who got in early acceptance to Harvard. And he shows up there, and Debbie's got a picture that we'll try to send around, but it's my grandson standing in front of his freshman dorm, and above the picture, it says Pennypacker. Pennypacker was a freshman dormitory. And Jidge and I and 2 other guys were on the 4th floor of Pennypacker. And my grandson is now on the 2nd floor in Pennypacker. Okay. That's it on Jake from my end.
So is there anybody that's whose memory has kicked in and wants to revisit anyone else who was in the high list in the high up in the batting order? Anybody want to circle back and cover any of
Yeah,
those?
I will. I have an observation on Dave Agney. And I don't know, it seems to me that Dave liked to play on words. And he would say, for example, now I'm not going to be able to remember. He worked at New England Life. He always called it New England Deaf. He sang in the Masterworks Chorale, and he always called it the Master Race Canal. Right. And he also used to refer to himself as Agony.
Heard that, huh?
Anyway,
Yeah.
he was a great guy. He used to come to Nobles football games, and he'd sit there with my wife, and he would explain to her what was going on. And well, she knew nothing, of course, but it was just amazing. Of course, he couldn't see, but anyway, it was she always enjoyed those games because of Dave.
David,
I have a quick Agney anecdote. In 1967, I was renting a house in Wellesley, and Agney was a neighbor, and we used to go jogging, and we tie our wrists together with about a 4-foot cord. And this is Wellesley. We're not running on the road. We're running on the sidewalk with about 8-inch curbs. We're going full tilt jogging speed, and I'd say curb, and Agney would somehow step over the curb, never lost stride, never tripped. And this is a curb, like, every 20 feet is a curb. And it was like smooth sailing for him. I can never figure out how he did it.
Well, he could
That's
walk
amazing.
down to the gymnasium from the schoolhouse without any trouble walking down that long. Walk. Amazing.
Yeah.
Except there was a time, if I recall correctly, that he kind of got his signals missed, and he wound up in the Putnam's house. Mrs. Putnam was in there cooking something. In comes David.
Yeah, he got lost in the woods a few times, but it never seemed to bother him, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
His
Well, I
parents,
I can
His-
tell you another Agney story, which I'm the only one who knows, but some of you are sailors. Some of you have been out on sailboats. And I invited David out to go sailing, and he had never done that before. So I had a 22-foot sailboat called an ensign sloop, and we went up sailing out of Quistit Harbor down on the Cape. And it was a kind of a quiet day, and David began by taking a tour of the boat, which meant that he walked on all fours around the boat, up to the bow, up to the side, around, touching everything, feeling everything, listening to everything. It was the most phenomenal experience I've ever had. And when he had gone all around several times and felt all the rigging and all the masts and the vibration of the boat, he said, "Now I'm ready." And I said, "Great." And he came back and he took the tiller and he sailed the boat. And now
Wow.
for those of you who are sailors, you understand that there are some things that are easier to do, whether you can see or not. But he was able to sail that boat, close haul to the wind, steady as you go. And he just was an amazing learner of new things. And that was one of the ones that I will never forget.
wonderful.
Great story. Great story.
He taught himself to cane by walking around caning around the circle up to the castle and down to the gym and that big loop. And he just taught himself. So he repeated over and over until he got comfortable with the cane.
Wow.
Interesting.
Go ahead. Chris, you want to say something?
I want to say a thing about Mike Deinell. I used to pal around him a lot when we were, 10, 11, 12, 13. He went through one of the most amazing physical transformations. He was a pudgy guy. And after 1 year, he worked out all summer and everything. He came back looking like Charles Atlas. And I'll tell you, he is amazing. It's a good lesson for everybody that you can, do something if you put your mind to it.
Wow.
I'll keep that in mind.
I wish you did that. I wish you
Be
did
good
that
to me.
a little earlier. You might have blocked that guy that kept killing us. In the back. That was in his pudgy years.
Okay, Lenny, I'm going to have to leave. I've got an appointment here, but I appreciate this and I hope we can do more of it.
Well, I think everybody
Amen.
gets a pat on the back for joining us, and I think it's wonderful that Chip and Al again get the credit for getting it going.
Yeah.
Everybody,
Well,
nice to
yeah.
see you all. Anybody comes out to San Francisco, make sure you make contact. I'll punish you with some of my San Francisco tour guide jokes.
Are you still
Well, this
giving
group was
tours?
this class was really healthy. I'm sure there won't be any further memorials, right? No
Hey.
more.
Is there still a downtown San Francisco?
I'm sorry to get on that topic. It's disgusting is what it is. I mean, if you get lucky, you go through there and it's like you never saw anything, but more often not, 4 days out of 5, you've got homeless, any part of town, sleeping on the sidewalk, in doorways, and it's just, and of course, the crime and the drugs is just horrible. They've closed down beautiful public spaces to make housing encampments. So I'm sorry you asked that question, but we'll still give you a good time if you come.
I spent
May I
one
make-
night in San Francisco on business and I didn't have any hotel lined up. So I found a nice little bed and breakfast. And it was right on the corner of, what is it, Market and California? Is that right, Lenny? The main drag, right on that corner. And I got a room on the ground floor, right on that intersection. 6 o'clock in the morning, the cable cars start going.
Okay,
And with their bells.
well, that's appropriate. Corner of Market in California. That's what you're going to get. Yeah.
I was in the thick of it.
Well, welcome to our classic city.
May I make one more Nobles related comment?
For sure.
I haven't been very close to the school these past years, but I learned 2 months ago that a first cousin once removed of mine from Atlanta named Margaret Draper is now an English teacher at Nobles.
No
And
kidding.
went to the University of Virginia and ended up teaching at Nobles, and I can't figure out how that happened. But I'll be probably going out there to see her. She sent me a picture taken of the full school. Remember the way we used to have the full school pictures
Yeah.
from our senior year? And she said, "Are you in this picture?" I said, "Yeah." 6th guy from the right on the top row, the blonde with the cocky smile.
I'm gonna tell one more Judge Draper story. And that is, of course, he lived right around the corner from me. We were childhood friends from the very beginning. But when we first, 6th grade at Nobles, I don't know if you remember the name, but he was a senior at the time. His name was Bebo Gregg.
Yeah.
And that'll ring a bell with a lot of people. But he drove us to school. And it was me, George, Judge, and Chris Brown. And the two of them sat in the back seat, and I was up next to Bebo in the passenger seat, while George and Chris Brown wrestled in the back seat. They would fight every day on the way to work and back. Is that right, George?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We were the 2 smallest kids in the school at the time. And I think I was still the smallest kid in the school in the 9th grade year. But anyway, I finally grew up a little bit.
Great times.
In that vein, my first day at Nobles, literally my first day, we had a new carpool and Barry and Jidge were in it and Chris Brown. And as we're going into the schoolhouse, Jidge said to me, "Now, Mr. Putnam's going to give a little talk. He usually gives some kind of a thing, 10 minutes. He said, but don't applaud when it's over. You were so worried that I was going to applaud." Oh, well.
Hey,
by the
wait a
way-
minute. Did you bring up a good point about, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to thank Al Van Dam for his good work as class secretary, because when we graduated, Mr. Putnam appointed me class secretary as I was a freshman at college, and I didn't do a damn thing about it because I didn't know what to do. And the development office at Nobles at that time was Elliot Putnam, and he wasn't going to tell me how to be a class secretary. But Al has done a great job, and we all owe him.
Hear, hear.
Thanks for sticking in there.
Yeah.
I got to thank Judge for one more thing. Remember the freshman year, I said that in my email. I was flunking the half course on writing skills. And the first 6 issues that I wrote came back with an F on it or whatever. They were terrible. I was going nowhere. And I had this new assignment, and Judge looks over my shoulder. He says, "Let me write that goddamn thing." So he writes it. Remember, George, was I not correct in what you wrote in that paper that I used? You
About
remember?
Ted Williams. Ted Williams.
Yeah, it was climax, Ted Williams home run. That was how this guy pictured it. And I got an A+. And I without George writing that for me. Okay. Signing off. And
Barry couldn't handle it. Welcome back, Barry.
okay, baby. See you guys.
Speaking of creating things, how many of us can remember what their speech was about?
I can.
But the
I
what?
can.
At
What the
Nobles?
speech, the senior speech at Nobles.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, in front of the whole class, the whole school.
Right.
Yes. The
Yeah.
only one I remember is Tom Botsford and scuba diving. He had a hard time pronouncing scuba. Anyway,
I remember Tony Wilkins had a guitar up there on
It
your.
was
Yes,
popular
remember.
music. Yeah.
I remember that too. Mine was on apartheid, I think, but it ain't. But we had the senior course that Mr. Wise ran, senior speeches, and we all had to get up at one point in time and talk
Extemporaneously.
extemporaneously. Yeah, and my subject was the most important, the most impressive man I ever met, and I couldn't get his name out. Finally Grandin Wise come up, he says, come on, Barry, come sit down. We'll work on this later.
John Auerbach's was about apples.
Apples?
Apples. He had a knife and he carved apples and talking about, I remember talking about the apple, the Macintosh apple and the delicious apple.
Really?
It was good.
I don't remember that. You'd think we would, yeah.
How many remember Rudy Bouzet speech?
Yeah.
Yes.
The class ahead of us, and somehow we had put together a conspiracy. And you know how after you gave your speech, the whole 180 people would be clapping, and the senior come back to their seat. But with Rudy, they made a pact that nobody would clap. The man walked back.
We should have remembered that. That's great.
Harry Healer came in a white toga and gave a speech on, Roman history.
Harry, oh my God.
Yeah.
Did we jack up the rear wheels of Dick Healer's wagon, the station wagon, the Woody that he had? It was also, I believe that we jacked up the rear wheels so they're just imperceptibly off the ground, and he got in to drive away, and it wouldn't go anywhere.
I had nothing to do with that. Lenny Holmes probably did, but I
I plead ignorance.
pretty good trick though. Poor Dick. Yeah, he's been a
And you
loyal.
talk about George Blanchard and Princeton. When I was committed to go to Yale and hadn't applied anywhere else, Elliot Putnam came up to me and put his arm around my shoulder. I can remember just where on the campus it was. And he said, Kenny, you don't want to do this thing. And I had no idea what do you this thing. He said, at least give Harvard a chance. No.
Wasn't that something back in those years? And a guy that was the backup junior varsity goalie at Harvard is still the director of admissions at Harvard.
Huh.
Debbie helped me with his name.
Wow.
Yeah, he's been there. He's the senior dean of all deans of admission in the country. He's been there 45
Wow.
Fitzsimmons, Bill Fitzsimmons.
Wow.
And I have written letters for certain candidates, one of which was my latest grandson, but other people that I bump into and they say, you went to Harvard? I said, yeah. And I insist on knowing the kid, but I have written, I may have a 50-50 success record, but Debbie was the assistant to the Babson director of admissions, and their favorite statement was the thicker the folder, the thicker the kids. If the folder is this deep because you got a lot of bullshit letters from cousins and uncles, and that kid needs help. So there was one of the this is just a joke that I've seen over the internet, and that is a kid taking a test for a test in college, and the bell rings and it's over. You got to get out. And the proctor says, there's one guy still sitting out there. He says, come on, it's over. Get the hell out of here. He finishes it. And then he walks up and there's a whole stack of applications sitting on the proctor's desk. And the kid says to the proctor, do you know who I am? Proctor says, I don't know who the hell you are. He says, good. He lifts up half the paper, half the pile, sticks his in the middle and walks out. You'll never catch me.
Here we go. Well, yeah.
All right, I'm signing off, guys.
Okay, well, I think we've done justice to everyone, and let's hope we don't have to have another meeting for the same purpose anytime soon.
Well, and hope we're all here for the next.
It's always fun to hear the stories, and I'm happy to on the technical side to enable it. And it'll be a day or two before that recording will find its way onto YouTube, but I'll send everybody an email and a link to YouTube to get the recording.
There's
And I
another
want to-
question, Lenny.
Good. Okay, Lenny, thank you.
Thanks, Lenny.
Yeah, Lenny, you were great.
Good job.
Hey, Lenny,
Yo,
Lenny, I have a question. Is everybody 80 or over?
Are we
Is
missing? are we
anybody
missing
here
two
under
guys?
80?
Yeah,
I didn't see 14
who's that?
classmates on here.
I am by 5 days, October 25th.
I'm 80.
Roger Burley is January 12th. He has
Yeah.
not made it yet.
I'm
General-
November 17, November 17. I'll be 80 then.
October 25th was a day to be remembered. It was
A day in
Giants-
infamy.
It was the Giants, New York Giants playing the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1950, whatever it was. And it was the shot heard round the world. And it was Bobby Thompson that hit an extra inning home run to beat the Giants beat the Dodgers.
The Giants win the pennant. The Giants win the pennant. The Giants win the pennant. Remember?
Whatever. Okay.
Okay,
See you
well,
guys.
have a great day, week.
Thank you.
Christmas.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Lenny.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Lenny, thanks a
holidays.
lot.
Great job,
Thanks,
Lenny.
Lenny.
Bye-bye.
Everybody,
That worked out pretty well.
very well.
Good work, Lenny. It was really very smooth.
Well,
Not
we're all a
my
team.
effort.
It's all a team. Everybody showed up on time and it was great.
I
Lenny,
didn't.
by the way, I was supposed to tell you that Hans would like to have been here, but it's way past his bedtime.
Hey, it's past my bedtime.
My cocktail hour.
I got 3 hours to
No,
go.
no. It's been cocktail hour for quite a while.
Great job, Lenny.
Have a good one,
Thanks
everybody.
again.
Way to go.
I just wish we'd have more people, but maybe next time.
We
No.
couldn't fit him on the screen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's do it again soon. Do it again soon.
Chop, chop.
Yeah.
Again.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right.